My husband set an envelope on the table like it was a verdict, and for one full second, my whole family sat there and let a stranger's lab report decide whether I still belonged in my own life. That's where I want to start. Not at the beginning, because the beginning was ordinary, and ordinary isn't what you're here for. I want to start at the exact moment my mother-in-law stood up from her chair like a judge about to sentence me, and my 8-year-old son slid under the table to hide from people he'd called family his entire life. Before I take you back to how we got there, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your country in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever had people you trusted decide something about you before they ever asked you a single honest question, you already know exactly how this dinner felt. My name is Michelle Turner. I'm 42. And that Tuesday night, my husband of 16 years looked at me across a table I had set with my own hands and told me it was time to tell the truth about a truth I didn't even know I was accused of hiding. I'm a labor and delivery nurse at a hospital outside Columbus, Ohio. 16 years married to a man named Ryan Turner, who runs a small HVAC repair company, the kind of business that lives or dies on referrals and word of mouth. For most of our marriage, I've been the steady paycheck when his wasn't. I never minded. That's what you do when you love someone. You carry what needs carrying, and you don't keep score. We have a son, Noah. He's 8. He has Ryan's stubborn jaw and my habit of asking 3 follow-up questions before he's satisfied with an answer. That Tuesday started like 100 others. I'd worked a double the night before, slept 4 hours, and was back on the floor by 2. Around 4:30, Ryan called. "Mom wants everyone there early tonight," he said. It wasn't the words that stopped me. It was the flatness underneath them, like he was reading lines someone else had written for him. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just come straight from work. Bring Noah." He hung up before I could ask anything else. I picked up Noah from his after-school program. He climbed into the back seat, backpack half open, chattering about a kid named Tyler who'd gotten sent to the principal's office for putting a frog in someone's lunchbox. I listened with half my attention. The other half was still turning over the sound of Ryan's voice. His mother, Carol, lives at the end of a cul-de-sac that hasn't changed in 30 years. Same brick ranch houses, same maples dropping the same leaves every October. I've walked through that front door for 16 years. I know the creak of the 3rd porch step, the smell of her lemon polish on the banister. That evening, none of it felt familiar. The porch light was on, but the house felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Ryan's sister, Amanda's car, was already in the driveway, parked at an angle like she'd pulled in fast. Something in my stomach tightened before I even had a reason. Inside, the table was set for 5. Napkins folded with a precision Carol usually saved for holidays. Amanda stood near the kitchen island, arms crossed, not looking at me. Carol was at the stove, stirring something that didn't need stirring. Ryan was already seated at the head of the table, which was unusual. He was never the first one seated. Nobody said hello. Nobody hugged me. I set my purse down slowly, watching Noah hesitate in the doorway instead of running off to find his cousins the way he always did. Even an 8-year-old could feel it. The air had a texture to it, heavy, rehearsed, like everyone in that room had already agreed on something without me. We sat down. For the first few minutes, nobody spoke. Forks against plates, the hum of the refrigerator. Amanda's eyes kept flicking toward Ryan, like she was waiting for a cue. Then he set down his fork. "Michelle," he said, and his voice had that same flatness from the phone call. "It's time to tell the truth." The room went still. I looked at him, genuinely confused, my mind racing through every possible thing he could mean. A financial problem, something about his health. I had no idea that in the next few minutes I'd be sitting at that table listening to my own family put me on trial for a truth I didn't even know I was supposed to be hiding. I need to tell you about the 16 years before that dinner, because you can't understand how deep a betrayal cuts unless you understand how much trust was there to break. Ryan and I met at a mutual friend's wedding when I was 26, still new to nursing, still living on overtime pay and vending machine coffee. He made me laugh so hard at the reception that I knocked over a centerpiece. And somehow, that became the story we told at every anniversary dinner for the next decade and a half. We married a year later. For the first several years, things were good. Simple, but good. Ryan worked for other contractors before he saved enough to start his own company. And I worked my way up from a floor nurse to a labor and delivery specialist. When Noah was born, something in both of us softened, the way it does when you finally understand what you're protecting. But marriages aren't only made of good years. Ryan's business nearly folded twice. The first time a former partner walked off with half their equipment and most of the client list. The second time, a major contract collapsed right after he'd hired 2 new technicians. Both times, I picked up every extra shift the hospital would give me. I never resented it. I want to be honest about that, because what happened next might make you think I was owed some secret payback. I wasn't. I loved him. I loved the life we were building, even when it wobbled. What I didn't understand, what I only pieced together after that dinner, was how much his mother's voice had been living in the back of his mind the whole time. Carol never liked me. Not really. She was polite in the way people are polite when they've decided not to make a scene. But I always felt her watching, cataloging how I dressed, how I spoke to Ryan, how much time I spent at the hospital instead of at her son's side. Amanda's feelings toward me were more complicated. She and Ryan were close, the kind of close where siblings finish each other's sentences and always take each other's side in old arguments. I think somewhere along the way, she started to see my closeness with Ryan as something taken from her rather than something separate. Later, I would learn it started with something small. An offhand comment from Amanda at a 4th of July barbecue, half a joke about how Noah didn't look much like either of them. Ryan laughed it off in the moment, but the comment lodged itself somewhere and wouldn't leave. Then Carol added her own quiet remarks over the following months, the kind of thing mothers say when they want to plant something without taking responsibility for planting it. He has such different coloring. Are you sure everything was fine on that conference trip? Small sentences, dropped like seeds, watered patiently over time. And Ryan, who had never once in 16 years asked me directly if I'd been faithful, let those seeds grow into something enormous. Something he never gave me the chance to address until it had already taken root as certainty in his mind. By the time we sat down at that table, he wasn't looking at me as his wife of 16 years. He was looking at me as a woman on trial. Amanda spoke first, and I understood immediately that whatever was about to happen had been planned, maybe discussed in some conversation I was never invited to. "Do you remember your trip to Denver?" she asked, not looking at me, addressing the question to the table as if I weren't sitting right there. 2 years earlier, a 3-day nursing conference. I remembered it perfectly. Hotel receipts. A roommate named Patricia from the NICU who snored so loudly I barely slept. I told her as much, my voice steady even as my pulse had started to climb. "And all those night shifts," Amanda continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Every week, sometimes back to back, nobody really knows where you are during those hours, do they? I'm at the hospital, Amanda. I have badge scans, time cards, co-workers who could vouch for every hour of every shift I've worked in that building for 12 years. Carol set down her water glass with a click that felt deliberate. "Women always leave clues, Michelle, whether they mean to or not." I looked at this woman who had sat across from me at 100 dinners, who had held Noah as a newborn, who had once told me years ago, in a rare, unguarded moment, that she was glad Ryan had found someone steady. That woman was gone. In her place was someone looking at me like evidence in a case already decided. Ryan finally spoke, and his voice had a tremor I hadn't heard since his father's funeral. "I've had doubts," he said, "for months. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The coloring, the bone structure, things people said." He glanced at his mother, then his sister, gathering courage from their faces before he could look at mine. "So I did something. I need you to know I did something." My stomach dropped before he said the words. "I took some of Noah's hair from his hairbrush. I sent it in for a paternity test. I want to pause here and ask you something, because I think about this constantly. If your own husband, without ever asking you a single direct question, secretly tested your child's DNA based on comments his mother and sister had been planting for months, would you have forgiven that the moment he apologized? Or would something in you have already closed a door, the way something closed in me the second he said those words? Tell me in the comments. Is trust like that repairable? Or is the damage done the moment someone decides to test you in secret, instead of simply asking? I have my own answer. I'll tell you what happened, and you can decide if you agree. The room went silent in a way that felt physical. I stared at Ryan, waiting for him to tell me he was joking. His face didn't change. He reached into his jacket pocket and set an envelope on the table. The same envelope Amanda would later slide toward me with her fingertips, like she didn't want to touch it any longer than necessary. "I got the results back this morning," he said. I looked at that envelope sitting on the white tablecloth, and I felt something in me go very still. The way I imagine a person feels in the seconds after an accident before the pain fully arrives. 16 years, I said. My voice didn't rise. I didn't cry. Some clinical part of my brain, the part trained to stay calm during a crashing delivery, took over and held everything else together. 16 years, Ryan, and you never once asked me. You went behind my back. You took our son's hair without telling me. You let your mother and your sister sit here and build a case against me instead of picking up the phone and asking your wife one honest question. He couldn't meet my eyes. I turned to Noah, who had gone very quiet beside me, his small hands gripping the edge of the table, eyes darting between the adults like he was solving a puzzle that terrified him. I pulled him against my side. I felt him trembling. Carol's voice cut through the quiet. We'll take care of the boy, Michelle. Whatever happens here, Noah is still a Turner. He belongs with this family. Something in me that had been bending for the last several minutes finally straightened. You will never take my son, I said. And for the first time since I'd walked through that door, my voice carried an edge sharp enough to make Carol blink. Not you, not Amanda, not even Ryan, not like this, not with an envelope and a rehearsed speech and a table set for everyone except me. That's when the doorbell rang. Nobody moved. I realized later it must have rung once already, swallowed by the roaring in my own ears. But this second ring was unmistakable, clear, insistent, cutting straight through the tension in that dining room. The bell rang a third time, longer now, and finally Ryan pushed his chair back with a scrape that seemed too loud for the silence we'd all been sitting in. He walked toward the hallway like a man moving through water. I stayed where I was, one arm around Noah, my eyes fixed on the envelope. I hadn't touched it. I don't think I could have. Not yet. I heard the front door open. A pause. Then Ryan's voice, confused. Can I help you? I'm looking for the Turner family. A man's voice answered, low, steady, the particular calm of someone used to delivering serious news. I'm sorry to come so late. This couldn't wait. I knew that voice before I even saw his face. Dr. Nathan Ellis stepped into the doorway behind Ryan a moment later, and something in my chest lurched. Not fear this time, but a strange, disorienting flicker of recognition. He'd been the physician who delivered Noah 8 years earlier, the man whose steady hands had guided my son into the world during a labor that had gone on for 21 exhausting hours. Dr. Ellis, I said, rising halfway out of my chair. He found me immediately, and something in his expression eased with relief, like he'd been afraid he'd be too late. Michelle, thank God. He held a thin folder against his chest, the edges worn soft from handling. I need to speak with your family. I know this is an unusual time, but I promise you it couldn't wait until morning. Carol had risen from her chair, her expression somewhere between confusion and irritation. The look of a woman who didn't appreciate having her evening interrupted regardless of anyone's credentials. I'm sorry. Who exactly are you? Dr. Nathan Ellis. I was the attending physician when Noah was born 8 years ago at Riverside Memorial. He glanced around the room, the untouched plates, the tension still hanging in the air, the envelope on the table that he had no way of understanding yet. I apologize for the intrusion, but I received a call a few hours ago that I couldn't ignore. Once I understood what it meant, I got in my car immediately. Ryan stood frozen near the door, clearly trying to piece together why a doctor he barely remembered had appeared on his mother's porch on exactly this night. Please, Dr. Ellis said, gesturing toward the table. I think you should all sit down. What I have to tell you concerns exactly the kind of situation I suspect you've been discussing tonight. We returned to our seats, though the arrangement felt different now, less like a courtroom, more like a waiting room. Dr. Ellis set the folder down carefully in front of him. I think, he said, looking directly at Ryan, then at the envelope still resting near my hand, that you may be about to make a terrible mistake, and I believe I know why. He opened the folder. Inside was a hospital record from the night Noah was born, and a letter, one he'd written himself that same evening after receiving an urgent call from the independent lab that had processed Ryan's mail-in DNA test. The lab, it turned out, had flagged an internal contamination issue affecting a batch of home collection kits processed that same week. Kits whose results had come back scientifically unreliable, including Ryan's. Dr. Ellis had been notified as the original delivering physician of record, and the moment he saw the Turner name on the flagged batch list, he'd driven straight to the only address he had on file. The paternity results sitting unopened on that table, the one Ryan had built an entire family trial around, had never been valid in the first place. I watched Ryan's face change. I watched Carol's hand slowly lower from where it had been resting near her chest. I watched Amanda look down at her plate and not look back up. Nobody in that room apologized to me that night. Not really. Not in the way that would have mattered. But I didn't need them to. Not anymore. Something had already been decided the moment Ryan set that envelope on the table without ever asking me a single honest question first. A real DNA test, a properly collected one, done weeks later through my own attorney, at my insistence for the record, confirmed what I already knew in the deepest, most exhausted part of myself. Noah was, and always had been, exactly who I always told them he was. Ryan and I are separated now. Not because of a lab error corrected by a stranger at a door, but because of everything that happened before that doorbell ever rang. 16 years of trust that apparently could be undone by a few whispered comments and one afternoon alone with a hairbrush. Noah lives with me during the week. He still asks sometimes why Grandma Carol doesn't come around as much anymore. I tell him the truth in pieces small enough for an 8-year-old to hold, that sometimes grown-ups make choices that are very hard to walk back from, and that it's not his job to fix any of it. I think about that table sometimes, about the envelope, about how close I came to losing everything over evidence that was never even real, presented by people who never once considered simply asking me the truth before deciding they already knew it. If you made it to the end of this one, I want to hear from you. Do you think Ryan and Michelle's marriage could have survived, even after everything, if he'd come to her honestly, instead of building a secret case first? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise your answers are just as important to me as the story itself. If this story hit home for you tonight, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. And whatever country you're watching from, thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next one.